Coming up on today's Locked On Dodgers, the Dodgers made decisions for qualifying offers. They made a decision on Justin Turner. We'll talk about all those decisions. We'll talk about a guy that's coming back to the Dodgers, and we'll talk about a potential starting pitcher that not necessarily linked to the Dodgers, but the Dodgers could potentially go after. That's what's on tap, so make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue. We're here every weekday morning, Monday through Friday, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Subscribe in those places and make it easy on yourself, and you'll never miss a day because you know we're not going to. I know today's episode's coming a little bit later than normal. It had some audio and a little bit of video mess up. So had to record this a little bit earlier in the morning after recording last night. So we got it figured out though, so we're good. And if this is your first time listening or watching, I'm Vince Samperio. I'm usually joined by co-host Jeff Snider, but he's out being a good dad, taking his child to a baseball tournament this weekend. So I'm handling today's episode. But we're both lifelong Dodger fans that have spent time covering the Dodgers, continue to cover the Dodgers, and have this here podcast where we talk about the Dodgers every Monday through Friday for about 30 minutes. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. Now let's get into it. The Dodgers had some decisions to make, some decisions we talked about, and our predictions were somewhat all over the place, but in the end, essentially what we said kind of happened. The Dodgers did extend a qualifying offer to Tyler Anderson. They also extended one to Trea Turner, but that was very well known that was going to happen. They did not extend a qualifying offer to Clayton Kershaw. However, it was reported a few hours after that Clayton Kershaw and the Dodgers were nearing an agreement on a 1-year deal. And then the Dodgers declined Justin Turner's option. They did not end up signing him at some point last night, but that's still something that can happen here in the next few days if possible. If not, maybe Justin Turner is really going to go through free agency. So we'll see what happens there. Today's episode, mainly going to focus on starting pitching, talking about Kershaw, talking about Anderson. Should the Dodgers hope that Kershaw's coming back? Should they hope that Anderson takes the deal? How hard should they pursue Anderson if he rejects the qualifying offer, and then one starting pitcher at the end that the Dodgers could go after that is probably going to ruffle some feathers, although I don't have a strong opinion on whether the Dodgers should or should not go after this guy anyways. Real quick before that, also announced was the Silver Slugger winners. The Dodgers had 2 winners. Trea Turner was the Silver Slugger, a shortstop in the National League, and Mookie Betts was one of the outfield Silver Sluggers in the National League. So congrats to them. First time for Trea Turner, 5th or 6th time for Mookie Betts. And, yeah, I mean, other than that, there was no real issues with none of the other Dodgers winning. Freddie Freeman had a strong offensive season, but Paul Goldschmidt was a little bit stronger. He's a legitimate MVP candidate and might win MVP. You had, second base. Gavin Lux was hot for a while, but Jeff McNeil was the winner of the batting title. You got third base. Dodgers didn't really have anybody, but Nolan Arenado won that one again over there. And then in the outfield, it was Mookie, Schwarber, Soto, which Mookie won, and none of the other Dodgers should have been there. Catcher, JT Realmuto had a slow start for the Phillies, but ended up really picking it up and honestly had some numbers that were better than Will Smith in a few categories. So him winning there isn't a big travesty or not like him winning the all-star spots over him the last couple of years when he wasn't as good at those points. He was good throughout the entire through the entire regular season. And then utility, Chris Taylor would have been the guy, although he mostly played outfield this year, but he didn't hit very well. So Yeah, that's where the Dodgers stand on Silver Sluggers. No real surprises. Trey Turner, Mookie Betts, very deserving. And that pushes us to starting pitching and what the Dodgers can do. And like I said, did not extend Kershaw the qualifying offer last year. That was out of respect for him, in order for him to make his decision, take his time, not have to worry about it. Kershaw was coming off injury last year, and they wanted, to give him that time, and they were nice. This time, again, did not extend him the qualifying offer. And then, like I said, a couple hours later, reported that him and Kershaw and the Dodgers were nearing on a 1-year deal. Some of the facts, or some of the figures that were reported, were around the same 17 million that Kershaw got last year, which is, I don't know if it's surprising that they, didn't just say, here, just take the qualifying offer. I don't know, what the extent of those conversations were between Kershaw and the team, where if he said, no, I don't want the qualifying offer, or I don't, the more he delays the qualifying offer, the Dodgers could, in theory, use it at one point in order to make a decision, or to bring him back, or whatever the case is. So interesting, but either way, Kershaw's back, and Kershaw is not always polarizing. I feel at this point he's less polarizing, especially to Dodger fans, than he was before. But it's also a matter of, he's getting older. He's not a guy that's going to carry your team as much anymore, and not necessarily a bona fide Cy Young candidate, only for the fact that he doesn't make 30 plus starts this season, because numbers wise, he's still very good, one of the top pitchers in the league, but he just doesn't have the number of starts and the number of innings that some of these other starters have ahead of him at this point. But I did see a tweet, I don't know from who or what, come across my timeline. And it was before the Dodgers had made the decision on qualifying offer, before they had reportedly, before they were reportedly bringing him back. And it said, unpopular opinion, I think, and I think the Dodgers should move on from Clayton Kershaw. And for me, it was interesting. And then I went to look at, to see if there was any replies, or if he was replying to people. And it appeared the wording wasn't the right wording. Moving on from Clayton Kershaw was the wording, and she, I don't remember who tweeted it out, went on to kind of put, basically, I don't think Kershaw should be like the 1 or 2 anymore. And honestly, that makes more sense. If you think Clayton Kershaw, the Dodgers should move on from Clayton Kershaw as a number 1 or number 2 pitcher, that's a fair and valid reasoning. If you think the Dodgers should just move on from Clayton Kershaw in general, I don't really understand that sentiment. And yeah, that's basically where it's at, and where it would be at. If Walker Buehler was healthy, it'd be Walker Buehler and Julio 1, 2, and then Kershaw at the very, most is your number 3. Could potentially drop down depending who else they got, or who else emerges from the young pitchers. So it's right now, technically, Kershaw could be your number 2, depending how strongly you feel about Tony Gonsolin, and then, Julio and Dustin May and everybody else. But I think to just put a broad generalization of the Dodgers should move on from Clayton Kershaw, that doesn't make sense, considering how good he was last year, how good he's been the last few years, and, relatively cheap if he's going to continue to sign 1-year deals in the, $17 million range. There's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. And with Clayton Kershaw, there's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal, even more so because he's Clayton Kershaw, been a Dodger forever, been a legend, future Hall of Famer. And at this point, why would you not want to see him in a Dodger uniform, especially if he's still pitching pretty well? And for the Dodgers, and for kind of what this offseason is, I think they do need to go and add an arm that pushes Kershaw to a for sure number 3. In theory, Tony Gonsolin, if he can replicate what he did last year, that could push Kershaw to number 3. Dustin May's stuff is number 1 or number 2 type stuff. If he can figure it out and recover more from Tommy John, yeah, that pushes Kershaw to at least a number 3. Tyler Anderson, if he does come back, he's right in that realm with Kershaw. They're very similar in terms of, what you would want as a number 3, 4 pitcher, whatever it is. So, yeah, the Dodgers do not count on Clayton Kershaw to carry them to the playoffs anymore. At this point, they want 20 to 25 starts for about as good as he's been pitching, and then hopefully healthy into the postseason. And yeah, I would hope that Clayton Kershaw's, on your game 3 starter or even a game 4 starter once it got to October. But until that point, he's still somebody that is very, very, very successful and should come back to the Dodgers. And that's what it looks like what he's going to do. Tyler Anderson, not for sure yet in terms of him coming back to the Dodgers, but him being extended a qualifying offer does help the Dodgers a little bit. I'm going to talk about Tyler Anderson and if the Dodgers should go after him. But first, let's talk about BetOnline, because today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, they've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, they also have those on betonline.net. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today and use your laptop or mobile device to learn more about the action, more about the stats, more about the news, more about the analysis, everything right there at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so Tyler Anderson extended the qualifying offer. I'll just run through a list of other players that received the qualifying offer. Some of these guys we're probably going to talk about here in the next week or so as Dodger targets. Some we have already talked about as Dodger targets. So it's Aaron Judge, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Jacob deGrom, Dansby Swanson, Carlos Rodon, Brandon Nimmo, Wilson Contreras, Chris Bassett, Anthony Rizzo, Tyler Anderson, Martin Perez, Jock Peterson, Nathan Eovaldi. I would say about maybe 60% of those were, yeah, for sure, Judge, Trey, Xander, deGrom, Dansby, we're all going to get it for sure. Rodon was going to get it for sure. And then you got some guys that you weren't, or, Anthony Rizzo can probably be thrown into that. Wilson Contreras can probably be thrown into that. But Brandon Nimmo, Chris Bassett, Tyler Anderson, Martin Perez, Jock Peterson, Nathan Eovaldi, all those guys weren't for sure slam dunks. Like I said, we talked about Dansby already. We will talk about Xander for sure. We've talked about Aaron Judge here and there. We're definitely going to talk about deGrom and Rodon at some point. Brandon Nimmo, I guess, deserves some type of conversation, especially if the Dodgers don't end up keeping Cody Bellinger, which we have a week before we find that out. Next Friday is the day to make decisions to tender contracts to players. So we'll know more about Cody Bellinger next week. But yeah, Tyler Anderson can now make $19 million next year if he wants, which is more than double what he made last year. The Dodgers had signed him to a 1-year, $8 million deal. So at the very least, he's parlayed that into more than double the money he had last year. And this is one of those where, as a Dodger fan, and maybe if you're more of a Dodger skeptic, you try to see if the Dodgers do bring back Tyler Anderson, they're already bringing back Kershaw. Are they just running it back? And should they run it back? And it's, I guess, a valid question in the sense of you don't think winning 111 games, but also losing in the first round, depends what you prioritize a little bit. But for me, it's one of those where bringing back Kershaw, even if you bring back Tyler Anderson, that doesn't stop the Dodgers from any other moves they could make this offseason. And realistically, any move that they would make pitching wise would be to add somebody that's above Kershaw and Anderson and probably above Julio. If they make a move for a starting pitcher this offseason, it's for a guy that's going to start game 1 of a playoff series. And bringing back Kershaw and Tyler Anderson doesn't affect that. What bringing back Anderson at this point with Kershaw would affect is potentially some of the younger guys getting some starts, but you look at this Dodgers rotation and let's just say they don't go after anybody top tier. And, you go in what you have right now and it's Julio, Kershaw, Gonsolin, May, and then if it's Anderson, and then after that, it's the younger guys. It's Grove, Jackson, and then guys who have already pitched, Pepio, and then guys who haven't pitched yet, Gavin Stone and Bobby Miller. And if, it's not guaranteed that Pepio, Miller, Jackson, Grove, Stone, none of those guys at this point would be projected to be in the starting rotation for the Dodgers next year, or at least you wouldn't think so. Now, it's very possible that one of them ends up being in the Dodgers rotation at the start of next season, but realistically, it doesn't appear that that would be the case, or that's something the Dodgers are planning for. The Dodgers are planning for them definitely contributing next season, but maybe not so much as, a rotation stalwart once the season starts. So the other part is between Gonsolin, between May, between Kershaw, none of those guys are guaranteed to give you a full season. Tony Gonsolin's dealt with a few injuries over the last few years. He's, never made 30 starts in a season. Clayton Kershaw hasn't made 30 starts in a season since, I believe, 2015. And realistically, his back's always going to put him on the IL maybe once or twice a season, like it has been for the last few years. You know, Dustin May still recovering from Tommy John surgery. It's unrealistic to just expect him to go up and start 30 times next season. Julio at this point has been pretty solid for 2 seasons in terms of durability. He's a guy that you expect to go out there every fifth day from game 1 to game 162. So bringing back a guy like Tyler Anderson also helps that part out, because while he doesn't have maybe the ceiling of some of these other guys like May and Gonsolin, we saw, I believe last season was more of a floor than it was a ceiling, or maybe a combination of the two, because he's not going to get much worse than he was, you would imagine, as the Dodger, and with the Dodgers being able to do it. And yeah, Jeff talked about the numbers between the shift and how that could help out a little bit. But, the numbers that graded out was what I think 4 or 5 runs over the course of a season, which isn't terrible and doesn't do too much. So for Tyler Anderson, what you're buying with him is stability, rotation stability. He doesn't throw hard enough to really make you worry about, oh, he's going to blow his arm out. And he's been a guy that's made 30, 25, 30 starts multiple times over the course of his career, and been a guy that's, an innings eater. And basically when the Dodgers signed him last year, I believe it was more to be an innings eater type. And we talked about it, give him 180, 200 innings at a 4.5 ERA. And that's more than the $8 million that they gave him. That was way, more value than the $8 million they gave him. And he went on and he did one better. He was an all-star, had an ERA under 2.5. And after starting the season as a piggyback guy, he was a guy that didn't miss any starts and the rest of the way, and had their best postseason start of the 4 starts that were made. And, as we talked about, probably should have been given a little bit more time to pitch longer that game. So if you feel like bringing back Kershaw and Anderson is kind of bringing back the same playbook or replicating or whatever the case is, I would argue that it's more so for stabilizing your rotation and allowing these younger guys the ability to fit in where they can, and have the luxury of being able to put them in spots where you feel comfortable, rather than guaranteeing them a spot and putting them in, in situations that they may not be ready for, or you don't want to necessarily focus on too much. So I'm all in on bringing Tyler Anderson back. I've already said it. Realistically, every time I say I'm in for this person, it's always with the caveat of for the right price. But realistically, that caveat doesn't need to be said, because for the most part, the Dodgers have never paid too much for somebody, or never, gone above their means in order to sign someone. So if he comes back for the 19 mil, great. If the Dodgers end up trying to, get 2 or 3 years out of him for maybe not as much AAV, but a little bit more guaranteed money, great as well. If he does end up leaving, the Dodgers do get a draft pick, which they won't reap those benefits until a few years down the line, assuming the draft pick pans out. But at the very least, they're getting something for their $8 million investment they got last year, which, is not a bad thing in case that he leaves. So bring back Tyler Anderson. And the next pitcher I'm going to mention would be one of those guys that slots as your game 1 starter, maybe game 2, depending how you feel about him. But before we get into that, just a quick reminder to make Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with Locked On Sports Today, available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. All right, so someone that did not receive a qualifying offer but did opt out of his contract the other day was Justin Verlander. And yeah, we talked about Carlos Correa already this week, And now we're going to talk about a little bit about Justin Verlander, and rightfully so. If you don't want to hear those two names as potential Dodgers, I completely understand. And I'm not quite as on board with Verlander as I am with Correa at this point. Justin Verlander is likely going to win the American League Cy Young coming back off injury. He was 18-4 with the 1.75 ERA, 28 games started, 175 innings, 185 strikeouts, a .83 WHIP. The interesting case with him is that he wasn't necessarily dominant in any one particular category. Preventing walks was his best category in terms of the Baseball Savant percentile rankings. He was 94th percentile in walk rate. After that, you got 91st percentile in expected ERA, expected WOBA. And then other than that, you got some 80s, some 70s, some 60s. Nothing that shows, oh my God, this guy was, completely dominant. The fact that he had a 1.75 ERA shows that he was dominant, but it was an interesting way of being dominant. And when you look at it, his expected ERA was 2.66, so almost a full run higher, and still really good. Maybe not Cy Young worthy if he had an ERA of 2.66, but still top 5 Cy Young worthy, and still, one of the best pitchers in baseball for sure. So it's one of those where would the Dodgers consider Justin Verlander? And, we got to start we talk about the Dodgers can afford whatever they want and do whatever they want. And yes, they can. But if they're also trying to be mindful and, it's not just a matter of spending because you can, it's a matter of still being smart about it. And Justin Verlander turned down $25 million. The Astros had signed him to a 2-year deal worth $50 million with an opt-out available after the first season. And that's what happened. And, Justin Verlander is 39 years old. And it's one of those where I've seen a lot of reports saying he wants maybe a multi-year deal, 2-3-year deal, similar to Max Scherzer and what he got last year. And I don't know if I'm on board for Justin Verlander for a 3-year deal. I would definitely be more on board with the 1 or 2-year deal. And at that point, you're going to pay a little bit more. So you're going to maybe get to 25, 30 mil a season. And is that worth it? And then, it comes down to, he brings a little bit of the baggage. He was on the 2017 team. He's not necessarily the most liked guy in baseball in general already. And it's a matter of, is that something you want to disrupt for a 39-year-old pitcher who is coming off a Cy Young season, but he's 39. At some point, Father Time's going to catch up, especially for a guy that relies a lot on velocity. And his fastball velocity did go up. No, never mind. His usage of the slider has gone up in recent years. His fastball is still one of his most used pitches. The use of his curveball has gone down. So he's somewhat reinvented himself the last few years, but not to the point of this guy's, it's not like Clayton Kershaw going, I can still throw 95 and now I can't. So now I'm throwing mostly sliders. Verlander's still a guy that relies on that four-seam fastball, but he's also started to rely on that slider a little bit more than he did before. And when you're obviously going to put out money for a guy who's 39 years old, you want to know for sure that it's going to continue. His velocity is still going to be there, and you're still going to have you're still going to get what he's been pitching, how he pitched last season. And that's hard to say with the guy of his age. But if it's a 1 or 2 year deal, at the end of the day, yes, it is just money. So, Justin Verlander averaged 95 miles an hour on his fastball last year, which is pretty much in line with his career. I think he topped out at 95.3 in the last few years, 96.3 back in the day, 2009, when he was still young. And the other part is, everything else on his pitching repertoire has been the same. His slider is still the same. His changeup still basically the same. His curveball, which you don't throw that often, still the same. So he hasn't lost much in terms of velocity. And that's the good part. But also it's a matter of, what happens if that velocity does drop or does go down? Does he have the pitching ability to be able to overcome that? And obviously, if you're somebody that signs Justin Verlander, you're expecting the velocity to stay the same, and you're not necessarily banking on pitchability or pitching ability to kind of carry him through however long you sign him. So it's a question of, do you trust it and is it worth it? And for me, I don't think it's worth it at this point. I would say I still trust it at least for one more season for him to be able to use his velocity in order to be successful. Um, and I don't know if he's going to return to the Astros. The Astros have a lot of young arms, cheaper young arms that prove themselves. Justin Verlander, he did finally get his first win in the World Series where, he was the winning pitcher. But you can say that he was outpitched by Framber Valdez and Christian Javier, and even Jose Urquidy didn't start, but he pitched pretty well for them. Christian Garcia pitched pretty well for them. So you can theoretically say the Astros would be fine if they let Justin Verlander walk. And it's one of those where, well, if a team like the Astros is fine with letting Justin Verlander walk, why would another team want to pick him up? And or at least a team like the Dodgers. But like I said, if the Dodgers are going to, or Dodgers are making a move for starting pitching, it's going to be in the upper echelon. The other part too, with a guy like Verlander over a guy like Rodon or somebody else, and this is all subjective, of course. It just depends, If you feel like we're going to pay Julio after this season, and then Walker Buehler is expected to come back in 2024, then you don't necessarily need a guy on a 5 or 6 year deal. You can more so go after the Verlander type 2 years, maybe 3 years, with the expectation that he's going to give you one or two more good years. And then you have Buehler and Julio back as your number 1 and 2. Whereas a guy like Carlos Rodon, you might sign him 5 or 6 years, but does that put you out of the running now for Julio when he's a free agent, or does it, significantly lower your chances of bringing back Julio as a free agent? And then, Walker Buehler is going to come back. And obviously, it like I said, it depends on how they feel about Julio. If they feel like Julio is going to test free agency and we might not keep him, then a guy like Carlos Rodon makes more sense. If they feel like we're going to bring back Julio pretty much, barring any ridiculous $250 million deal that someone else offers him, and then we're gonna get Walker Buehler back, then yeah, a guy like Verlander makes more sense, and a guy like DeGrom would make sense in that realm as well. We'll talk about DeGrom probably next week or at some point this offseason. So for me, no to Justin Verlander, but I do think he will be linked to the Dodgers, and I do think that the Dodgers, will be in contact with him, and I do think it's a conversation to be had. And would he fit and would he make the Dodgers better? Yes. But is it worth everything else that comes with it? I don't think so, because it's a short-term deal and it's more like a hired gun type. Whereas earlier in the week when we talked about Carlos Correa, you're going to put a long-term investment realistically into Carlos Correa, or a big money investment, 4 or 5 years, whatever the case is, or a long-term deal, 300 mil or so. So I think that one is more of, you're going to build the bridge, where Verlander is going to come in and you kind of got to quickly build the bridge, and that's not necessarily the best way to go about it when you're constructing rosters and bridges. So yeah, Justin Verlander, possibility. I don't think he comes to the Dodgers, but I do think he'll be linked and we'll have conversations with the Dodgers. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up signing here, but I personally don't see it, and I don't think it's going to happen. So that's all for today's episode. All starting pitching. Basically, if long story short, the Dodgers continue to shore up their depth and need to find a bona fide number 1. And that's really what they need for starting pitching this offseason. So thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, Locked On Sports Today goes beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. That's also where we're available, wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube. If you have any Dodger fan friends or family or coworkers or whoever, somebody in your life that likes the Dodgers, make sure to tell them to check us out. Locked On Dodgers. They might like us. If you like us, they might like us. You never know. And if you're only listening a couple times a week, make sure to ramp it up to 5 times a week, because we're here for you every Monday through Friday So why not, spend 30 minutes of your day with us during the week, every Monday through Friday. You can find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers, or Twitter as long as Elon Musk keeps it going, because it doesn't seem very promising at the moment, but that's beyond the point. You can find Jeff on Twitter at Snider. I'm Evan Samperio. DMs are open on all those counts if you need to get hold of us. DMs are also open via email. That's not the way to say it, but you can send us an email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. You can also send us a voicemail or a text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us. When you get in your car, or if you're at home, tear smart device, play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.